Hi, welcome to the Old Earth Bible Study. We like to ask for a word of wisdom from our Heavenly Father in Yeshua's name. Thank you, Father. The Old Earth. Many creationists and Christians think the Earth is only 6,000 years old. This video is going to address that scripturally. Let's see what the Bible has to say about it. Not only do we have Genesis 1, but we have the book of Job, chapter 38, to almost a direct correlation between the two. So let's go ahead and look and see what it has to say. Now, what I'm showing here is the first earth age. In Genesis 1:1 it says, "In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth." So if every word of God is written to mean something, then Genesis 1:1 means that God created the heavens and the earth. And they were very old. And in Job chapter 38, you have God finally talking after 38 chapters or so of Job and his friends talking, and his friends think they're really smart. They think they're great preachers. They think they know more about God than anybody else, and they go on and on about their theories about God. And is God righteous? And did God punish Job because they think Job did something wrong? And they're going on and on about all these different theories of why God did it and why God is punishing Job. He wasn't punishing Job at all. So then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, "Who is this that darkeneth counsel by words without knowledge?" Now, that's the King James Version. And verse 2, it's obvious. It says that these guys didn't know what they were talking about when they talked about God being righteous, when they talked about God creating. God is basically saying, let me give you a lecture about true knowledge. So we're going to look at this verse 2 in the Moffat, and Bullinger has a book called the Book of Job, and he has his own translation. So we're going to look at those two translations in this chapter and see what we can find out about the beginning. Because God says, let's start at the beginning in the book of Job. Even though we had 38 chapters of yammering on and on, we're going to hear from God himself. Okay, so my theory is Job 38 verses 2 through 35 are mirroring Genesis chapter 1, which is the creation. And many creationists say it's the creation of heavens and the earth. I think it's the recreation, because in Genesis 1:1 God created the heavens and the earth, and then we're going to look further at Genesis 1:2, what happened there. And we're going to compare it with Job 38. Now this is verse 2 in the Moffat Bible, which has a little bit different translation than the King James Version. And I like it because it says, "Who darkens my design with a cloud of thoughtless words?" So God is saying, I'm going to start out with my creation, not just the creation of the heavens and the earth, but God starts out at the beginning. And if you look at the outline of the verses from verse 4 all the way down to verse 35 in Job 38, you see a really interesting parallel being formed here. Now in Genesis chapter 1 verses 1 through 19 we have the inanimate creation, meaning not looking at the animals for now, which is day 5 and day 6. We're just going to look at the inanimate creation, the creation of the plants and the water and the biomes of the earth, the atmosphere, all of that. We're looking at the inanimate creation. And Job does talk about the animate, but I didn't want to make the video too long, so I'm going to start out with the inanimate first. So let's see how it compares to Genesis. Now we have day 1 was God separating the light from the darkness. So there we have in verses 19 through 21 the same topic, light and dark, in the book of Job. Day 2 and 3 talk about the atmosphere, the waters, and the earth. And you have the same topics in verses 22 through 30 of Job 38. Day 4 is all about the heavens, the sun and the moon ruling the day and the night. And in Job, you also have the same topic, the heavens, and they get really detailed in Job, or I should say the Lord gets really detailed. And then the first couple verses, which I should have highlighted first, you have Genesis 1:1, and what does that discuss? The creation of the heavens and the earth, and there you have the heavens and the earth discussed in Job. And God says, you know, we've got to start here at the beginning if you want truth. And then we have Genesis 1:2, which discusses the earth in a form that's not formed to be inhabited. In Hebrew it says, the earth became void and without form. So we have that discussion of what happened in these verses. The morning and the dawn, the springs of the sea. There's a darkness and a wickedness that's mentioned here. And it's from Satan, obviously, in the first earth age. And you also see the overthrow of the earth. The earth was overthrown. You'll see it in the Hebrew in Job 38. And then we'll move on to the actual recreation days and replenishing the earth. So in Genesis 1:1, I have an image here of the earth spinning. Obviously, it's not a recognizable earth because we don't know what it looked like when God first created it perfect. But in Job, we have the mirror of Genesis 1:1, and that is Job 38:4-6. Where wast thou when I laid the foundations of the earth? Declare if thou hast understanding. Who hath laid the measures thereof, if thou knowest? Or who hath stretched the line upon it? So what should be noted here is when God created the earth, He didn't create it out of a pile of junk or junk matter. He created it like a man would create a house. You start out with measuring. You start out with a cornerstone. And so let's continue to look at Job here. Verse 6, whereupon are the foundations thereof fastened? So if a man's building a house, he's going to put a foundation down. He's not building it out of junk. Or who laid the cornerstone thereof? It's being built from the ground up with perfection. It's not shapeless. It's not void. God created it from the beginning to be inhabited, and that's what we see here. Well, who inhabited this first earth? Or first earth age? When the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy. So there you have a beautiful creation. There's no perversion, there's no corruption in this creation yet. And that's what we see in Genesis 1:1, a beautiful creation. So we also see here that that what they have found in, and I have the reference down here, the book that's referenced, The Energy Non-Crisis. Okay, so when they're drilling for oil up there in Alaska, they find some interesting things. Now, Alaska's way up there above the Arctic Circle, and they were drilling for oil up here in Prudhoe Bay. And what did they find? 1,900 feet down. Ice. Though the ground is frozen for 1,900 feet down from the surface of Prudhoe Bay, everywhere the oil companies drilled around this area, they discovered an ancient tropical forest. Isn't that interesting? It was in a frozen state, not in a petrified state. It is between 1,100 and 1,700 feet down. There are palm trees, pine trees, tropical foliage in great profusion. In fact, they found them lapped all over each other, just as though they had fallen in that position. And that's exactly what happened. In the first Earth Age, it was beautiful and tropical over the entire surface of the Earth. And that's what made it possible for mammoths to roam in that area of the earth that wasn't frozen. Because as you know, elephants can't survive in cold air and they die. And the same with mammoths. They are not cold air animals. If you study their hair, it's not fur, it's hair. And it doesn't insulate them. And they would have to dig in the ground for salt. And they couldn't dig in permafrost. So these mammoths that they find in ice did not grow and live in ice. They were just frozen there, just like this tropical forest. So we have a Genesis 1:1 evidence of an earth that is completely at peace and temperate zones all throughout. We also have evidence of ancient coral reefs. Now, these are fossilized coral reefs. They're not, obviously, they're not alive. They're above the water. So the oceans had to have been higher. And for this coral reef to exist. So I have a quote from a book that I own, The Rocks Don't Lie by David Montgomery. Even assuming an unreasonably generous centimeter per year growth rate, living reefs more than 1,000 meters thick would require more than 100,000 years to grow. So this is a coral reef, a fossilized coral reef, and it's being undercut here by the water. So this coral reef would have taken 100,000 years to grow. So that would mean that our Earth was a beautiful temperate zone in the first Earth age, where there were tropical forests in the Arctic and there were coral reefs in the current desert areas. There was ocean where there wasn't ocean before. Not necessarily a deep ocean, but definitely the water level was higher. So that proves that we did have the Earth was different at one point, and then in order to get a fossil, you have to have a catastrophe. Because fossilization is when the plant or animal's covered with water, the oxygen is cut off from it, and the minerals are able to get in there and replace the living material, thus creating a fossil. And it has to happen with water, and it has to happen quickly, like a catastrophe. They wouldn't just slowly erode and then form a fossil. That wouldn't make a fossil. It would just disintegrate and deteriorate into nothing. So the fossils are evidence of a former Earth age. Now, to continue in Job, verses 8 through 11, we have the discussion of the sea. And this is really important because in Genesis 1:2, the sea is with tohu vabohu in Hebrew, which means without form and void. But in Genesis 1:1, it was beautiful earth, and it was inhabited. In verse 7, we had the angels who shout for joy lived in that first Earth age. And we're going to see here a continuing of that description of beauty, perfection, and nothing corrupt. So God discusses the sea. He says, "Who shut up the sea with doors, when it brake forth as if it had issued out of the womb? When I made the cloud the garment thereof, and thick darkness a swaddling band for it." Okay, so that's protection and the perfect environment to be inhabited. It's not void. It's surrounded in love and swaddled. That even the darkness of the ocean that you can't see underneath that water is a safe place in this first Earth age so far. "And break up for it my decreed place, and set bars and doors." This isn't void. This is not without form and void. This is perfectly designed, like God said in the Moffat Bible in verse 2. He said, "Who's darkening my counsel, my design, that I started this earth in the beginning?" These yahoos don't know what they're talking about with all their fake theories of the earth and how it was formed. God says, "Let me tell you how I formed it. I formed it to be inhabited." and said, hitherto shalt thou come, but no further. See, he's talking about the ocean. He told the ocean, you can't flood, and here shall thy proud waves be stayed. He created to be in a perfect, happy environment where the water did not flood and create any destruction. There was no destruction in the first earth age, although it would be destroyed because of wickedness. And we will see that in Job, but it hasn't occurred yet. So now we continue in Genesis, on the subject of Genesis 1-2 and Job. In chapter 38, we have the introduction of wickedness, which is exactly what happened in Genesis 1-2. The earth became void and without form. Now, how did that happen? Because in verse 12 here of Job, we have, hast thou commanded the morning since thy days, and caused the dayspring to know his place? The earth was spinning on its axis. The sun came up every day, it warmed the earth, gave the morning and the evening, and it was beautiful. But in verse 13, it says that it might take hold of the ends of the earth, that the wicked might be shaken out of it. So all we had in the earth was a beautiful inhabitable place where the angels were that sang together in verse 7. But now all of a sudden in verse 13 we have wicked being shaken out of it. So that's how the earth became without form and void. And in verse 14 we have a confirmation. This is indeed the overthrow. It is turned as clay to the seal, and they stand as a garment. The word turned is overthrow. You can look it up in your Strong's Concordance if you like to do that. It's number 2015. Hafak, overthrow. So the earth is overturned as clay to the seal, and they stand as a garment. I think they would be the wicked that are shaken out of the earth when the earth was overthrown. So now we got a picture of clay. So now the earth is misshapen. No longer is it perfect and in the perfect design as the first earth age, but it is changed. As clay, it's completely misshapen. And from the wicked their light is withholden, and the high arm shall be broken. So that's a little bit of prophecy there of what is going to happen to Satan, who is the wicked one. And he is referred to as the wicked one in the New Testament. I think it's the book before Revelation, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. He is called the wicked one. And now remember, this is all before the Garden of Eden. We're only in Genesis 1 verse 2, and we're going to expound upon the earth, what had happened to it. It was, remember, it was even in darkness, it was swaddled and protected in those first few verses of Job. But now it says, hast thou entered into the springs of the sea? Who is in the springs of the sea? The wicked one. Or hast thou walked in search of the depth? Have the gates of death been opened unto thee? Or hast thou seen the doors of the shadow of death? Okay, so we got some serious problems here in the sea. And that's picturing the place that Satan is put or locked up. Hast thou perceived the breadth of the earth? Declare if thou knowest it all. Now that's the King James Version. I'm bringing in the Septuagint, which is called the LES on the right side of your screen. That's the Septuagint that I have in my computer program. It's the Lexham English Septuagint. And I like it because it just makes it a little clearer. So I'm going to start with verse 17. And have the gates of death been opened to you in terror? So something has definitely gone wrong in the beautiful earth that God created. And we're not even Eden yet. And the gatekeepers of Hades, seeing you, cower. Okay, so Satan, obviously, or his angels that keep hell, cower at the presence of the Lord. And so God is asking Job and his oh so wise friends that have all these theories about the formation of Earth when they really don't even know about the first Earth age. God is trying to tell them, look, you got to know the beginning and what happened here. That there was death, and there was evil and wickedness before Adam was even put on the earth. And that's a good point, because a lot of people say it started with Adam. It didn't. It started with Satan. And Job is confirming that for us. In Job 38, verse 18, now this is E.W. Bullinger's version. And the reason I brought this in, I've got the King James here on the left, but I wanted to show you E.W. Bullinger because he says, the utmost breadth of the earth hast thou surveyed. Reply, if thou hast knowledge of it all. Okay, so who has surveyed the whole earth? Obviously nobody has surveyed the whole earth. But more importantly, did Noah survey the whole earth? Was Noah alive at this point? Can you say that that God is saying here that no man has surveyed the earth except for Noah? Because if the flood was global, Noah would have to have a knowledge of the entire earth to replace and regrow specific animals and plants all over the earth. He would have to know the monarch butterfly is in Central America and migrates to Canada. It would have to be planted exactly in the right tree, on the right hill. The monarch butterfly is found in one specific place on earth. And so is the famous cactus that everybody pictures when they draw a desert. It's only found in America. And in the West, there's a desert that only this cactus grows in that desert in America. So Noah would have to know this. Noah would have to have a lot of knowledge in order to spread these plants and animals all over the earth. And the dragon blood tree, only found in Madagascar. That's an island off of Africa. So he would have some serious problems. He would have to have surveyed the whole earth. God is obviously saying here, nobody's done that. Okay, so now we have in the beginning. I'm showing you what the Moffat Bible has for Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. Now obviously chapter 1, verse 1 is right here. Okay, but Moffat takes chapter 2, verse 4 and puts it first as the very first verse of the Bible. Now why would he do that? Because, and I have the King James version of that verse over here, these are the generations of the heavens and the earth when they were created in the day that the Lord God made the heavens and the earth. Because there's a certain sequence of creation here. And Moffat translates this verse, this is the story of how the universe was formed. The universe was formed first. The stars and obviously the planets, whatever else he's got out there, we don't know. That was created first. And then what happened was God created the heavens and the earth. So first you had to have the universe created in order to create the earth and put the earth in the universe. This just makes sense. You've got one step of creation begetting another. It's a metaphor. It's kind of like the universe is the father and the earth is the baby. And then we have in verse Genesis 1, we're going to go through the creation days, but we have the earth was without form and void in verse 2. Moffat translates that void and vacant. We saw in Job that he didn't create it that way. He created it so the sons of God would shout for joy, and that the earth and the sea would be swaddled like a baby in a blanket. Safety. It would be safety everywhere and completely inhabitable for the plants and animals God placed there. But what we're going to see is this verse being placed in the proper location gives us a description of how one step begets another step of creation. And it's a metaphor. You get the Father and the Son, a metaphor. So we're going to look at that as each day of creation. And generation number 1 is the universe. And then the earth would be the sun. It would be the next step. You have to have this first before you can have an earth. It has to be placed into the universe. And then you have in Genesis 1:2 the overthrow of the earth. It's confirmed in Job, the very word overthrow. I believe when God overthrew the earth and the wickedness, when he shook the earth, he threw it off its axis, he threw it out of its orbit, and stopped the rotation, which is kind of like the same thing as being knocked off its axis. That would stop the rotation. But he definitely jolted it. And that was not a creative act. So that's why I didn't count that as a generation. But generation 2 is day 1. The earth was set to spin again on its axis, creating morning and night. And the evening and the morning were the first day. Of course, the light came from the sun and shined upon this frozen, vacant, void planet. Half frozen, the part that was facing away from the sun, and half just sea and ocean of dirt and turbulent flooding coming up from the fountains of the great deep, if you will. But God, he said, I'm going to work on this earth again. And in Genesis 1 verse 2, it says, the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. So he said in Job, were you there when I created the morning and the dawn? Well, obviously we weren't. We weren't born then. We definitely weren't on the earth then. Not in the flesh. So God sets it to spin again, and this gives it a morning and an evening, and the light and the dark. And, you know, the frozen side of the earth could then thaw. So then on day 2, which is the 3rd generation here, you have the firmament being created, the atmosphere of the earth, the jet stream, the water cycle. All of this would be necessarily the sun of this generation. Why? Because you need the sun and the light. You need this cycle of morning and night to give the atmosphere enough heat. Because if the earth isn't spinning, then you can't have this atmosphere thing. The other side of the earth would probably be void, which is how it's described. So then we got the 4th generation, which is day 3. We have dry land, but not just any land. We have, there's like 5 earth biomes on the earth. You got the tundra, down to the desert, the different kinds of forests. You have the swamps, the tropical, all different areas of the earth that God designed, not Noah. Noah could not design the biomes of the earth. He'd have to travel to the tops of mountains. And Job is going to talk about whether it rained in these locations. Kind of like if a tree fell over, did it make a noise? Of course it did. God caused it to rain, and he fed the birds. They were located in these different areas of the earth. And Job is going to discuss these different areas where no man was, especially not Noah. So you also have the waters receding all over the earth and creating a new earth, not like the first Earth Age earth, where the ocean levels were higher and is relatively, there's nothing turbulent. But this Earth Age, there would be turbulence. There would be differences in deserts where there weren't before. And then, and that's why you find certain fossils in the desert of the ocean. They find whale fossils in an ocean. I mean, in the desert, in the Arabian desert, they find whale fossils and coral reefs, not torn up and picked up by turbulent waters, but just a whole entire reef fossilized in its place. And then this generation would be necessary to have an atmosphere. So that's why this is the sun, continuing the metaphor that God put into place. This generation would be the sun of the previous generation. You can't have biomes of the earth, like deserts and stuff, if you don't have a certain atmosphere. And if you can't have tropical forests without a certain water cycle put into place. And then you have the 5th generation. The Earth is put back into orbit. I believe it was knocked right out of its orbit, because this would be day 4. And the ruling bodies in heaven of day and night, the solar year established. This is when the Earth was put back into orbit and the solar year was established. The Zodiac was established in the firmament. We'll discuss that later. So, discussing each day in detail and comparing it with the book of Job. We have the first day. I believe this was the Earth being put back on its axis and being spun again. So now you have morning and night, and the Lord called it good. Where is the way where light dwelleth? Oh, that's interesting. Why is God discussing light? And as for darkness, where is the place thereof? Well, when it's morning, it's obviously light. The earth is lit up on, this half of the earth. And where does the darkness dwell? On the other side of the earth, where there's no sun. So he's saying, I'm setting up the perfect system for the earth here. That thou shouldest take it to the bound thereof, and thou shouldest know the pass to the house thereof. Where are the bounds of day and night? Well, on the edge of the earth, when it's spinning, there's that dawn and dusk. That's the end of the day and the beginning of the day. That's the bound that God put there. If you know thou it, because thou wast then born, if you were there, if there was any flesh man there at all, or because the number of thy days, because you're so old, he says, just tell me. Tell me how I set this up. Obviously, we don't know how God put the earth and hung it on nothing. And we don't know how he set it up like that, but it does describe the Genesis recreation of the earth. Day 2 is the firmament and the sea. Hast thou entered into the treasures of the snow? Or hast thou seen the treasures of the hail, which I have reserved against the time of trouble, against the day of battle and war? He used the hail in the first earth age to destroy it. And we're going to look at the evidence of that as it exists on the earth. All you got to do is look. I mean, he's going to use the hail again in Revelation, and use that to destroy certain parts of the earth again. So what happened to these guys? These are mammoths. This is an actual mammoth that was found, and it was destroyed by hail. It was destroyed in situ, in place. And its flesh was perfectly preserved. I have a quote over here describing the flesh of the animals found in the muck must have been very rapidly and deeply frozen, for the cells had not burst. Frozen food experts have pointed out that to do this, starting with a healthy living specimen, you'd have to suddenly drop the temperature of the surrounding air to well below minus 150 degrees. Holy coldness. Okay, so this is very close to the temperature of space, I think. I think space is negative 300, but regardless, the atmosphere was destroyed, and this animal was asphyxiated. According to scientists who study the physiology of the animal, they can tell by certain physiology that it was asphyxiated. Couldn't breathe. And he still had something chewing food in his mouth, and his stomach contents were preserved because of the extreme, I call it flash freezing, that occurred. It even froze the inside of the animal to be frozen until we dug them out of Siberia today. These animals are found all over the Arctic Circle where they couldn't survive today. They have to be in an age when it was tropical, like we see evidence of. So the firmament was destroyed along with the surface of the earth. And this recreation week is the recreation of the surface of the earth. You hear nothing about the core or any of that, just the surface of the earth, because that's all God is doing at this point. And 3 is dry land and plants. And I want you to note here that it's herb yielding seed after his kind, where the seed was in the plant. There are many plants that don't need a farmer because they drop the seed goes into the ground, grows another plant or tree. So that's a seed that's self-planting, seed after his kind. So we're not talking about plants that need to be sown by man. We're talking about plants that just seed themselves. So Job talks about this. By what way is the light parted, which scattereth the east wind upon the earth? Now remember, when did we have the atmosphere created? That was day 2. That's why this is the next generation. That's why this is the generations of the heavens and the earth. You have to have the atmosphere before you have wind. And then once you have atmosphere, then you can have wind upon the earth. Who hath divided a water course for the overflowing of the waters. So in this recreation, God created the water course for the waters to recede all over the planet, or a way for lightning of thunder, to cause it to rain on the earth where no man is. Not Noah. Noah did not recreate the earth. He did not run all over the place. I think this is Madagascar. Of course, I think this earth is spinning in the live show. But anyway, Madagascar's down there. And Noah didn't go down there and plant the dragon blood tree. He didn't go all over the earth to plant silver ants in the Sahara Desert. God did that. God caused it to rain on places of the earth where there was no man. And it's important to know that. This is just day 3. On the wilderness wherein there is no man, to satisfy the desolate and waste ground, and to cause the bud of the tender herb to spring forth. We have more in Job on this day 3. Hath the rain a father? Or who hath begotten the drops of dew? Okay, we still got this generation theme going on here. Out of whose womb came the ice? And the hoary frost of heaven, who hath gendered it? The waters are hid as with a stone, and the face of the deep is frozen. Okay, so that's talking about a frozen lake where the waters are hid underneath the ice. So this is basically the water cycle and the 3 states of water: frozen, liquid, and gas. And God created this cycle on day 3. So yes, we do have dew. We do have rain, dew. People say there was no dew upon the whole earth until chapter 2 of Genesis. That's not true. Because these fruits and these plants that seeded themselves are going to need dew. And Job confirms that there was dew and there was rain. And there was no man there in many of these places because the earth was brand new, recreated. Now day 4, I believe, is the orbit of the earth, because you already have the universe created in verse 1. You already have the sun created, giving light upon the earth in the first day of creation. So what is going on in day 4 when you have, here's your clue. God set them, which is the stars and everything, in the firmament. Now, he didn't literally put the stars in our atmosphere, because that's what the firmament's referring to here, is our atmosphere. He set them in a pattern so that when we look up, we would see them in a certain pattern, to give light upon the earth and to rule over the day and over the night, and to divide the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. and the evening and the morning were the fourth day. So let's look at this orbit. It gives us our zodiac. That means that God designed this zodiac. You say, well, that's ridiculous. Well, Job confirms it. 31 through the 40, canst thou bind the sweet influence of Pleiades, which is in the bull, or loose the bands of Orion? And I'm looking for Orion here. I think he's below the bull. I don't have him in the zodiac. I don't think. He's part of one of the deacons of the Taurus, the sign of Taurus. He's one of the accessory constellations, if you will. Canst thou bring forth the Mazzaroth in his season? What's the Mazzaroth? It's the zodiac. Or canst thou guide Arcturus with his sons? Knowest thou the ordinances of heaven? This has to do with our relation to earth, to when do they rise, when do they set? Canst thou set the dominion thereof in the earth? You see, the dominion of the stars means their relation to earth. So that's why day 4 is the earth being put back into its proper orbit. Because when God overthrew it, it was completely knocked off its axis, frozen in place, and out of orbit. And God set it up so that we would have this zodiac, which is basically God designed the gospel in the stars. And he would put the virgin who would bring forth the Christ child, and the King of Kings and Lord of Lords is pictured in the lion. And many other things are pictured in the zodiac, the gospel and the stars, which are written about by a couple different authors that you want to look into it. So in my next video, I'm going to discuss the animate creation, which is the animals, starting on day 5 and day 6.